All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome to another Future Focused, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. Like always, I am energetic and excited for today's conversation. But this one in particular, and I know I probably say that every single week, but I truly get very excited about these conversations. This week in particular, I'm excited because I'm going to be talking about the current state of the economy, the way this is moving, some of the uncertainty that's going on, and where that intersects with AI and some of the changes we're seeing, the pace at which things are moving, and what it all means, and hopefully just bring some additional wisdom and knowledge to that space, because I know a lot of people right now who are feeling overwhelmed, unsettled, unsure of what to expect. And I hope by the end of this, it's not going to solve all your problems, but hopefully you can walk away from it and go, I at least understand this better and maybe can make better decisions about what I can do, or maybe feel a little more at peace about where things are at. And to navigate that conversation with me, I'm joined by Bill Connerly. He is an economist and economic consultant. So he knows this game far better than I do, which I was really excited to. I follow a lot of economists and love the perspective they bring to really this landscape. And so, Bill, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to it.
Happy to be here, and I'm one of those people
Oh, you're
feeling
on. There we go.
overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are. So again, but I think the lens you bring will be really helpful. Even some of the things we talked about backstage, I'm really excited to how we'll unpack some of this stuff. And so for those who may not know who you are, may not be as familiar with you, I know you from when we met, how we've gotten to know each other. I know you're out in the Portland area on the West Coast, but what is kind of your background? How did you get into economics? What was that journey like for you? Did you always just love studying the way the world was working?
Well, I was in high school, and I had a good head for math, but I thought math was
Okay.
boring. I was interested in politics, public affairs, and a little bit of business, but I thought that if you and I were talking about, say, politics, I would be saying what I want, and you would be saying what you want, and there's no real foundation except I want this, you want that. And then I discovered economics, and I said, "Oh
Okay.
man, it's got the logical rigor of mathematics, but it applies to the real world." And
Okay.
then over the years, I decided that, economics is not enough of an explanation of how we ought to do politics and public policy. You need
Okay.
some philosophical background as well. But I continued studying economics, ranging from abstract theoretical work in graduate school, some public policy research. But what I really enjoy is helping business leaders understand changes in the economy and how changes in the economy will be impacting their business. And I'm not a business guy. I'm not a hands-on business guy aside from a consulting practice, but I find that most business leaders are sharp enough that they can figure out what to do, but there's so many things to do.
Yeah.
And I think that probably the greatest value I bring to the table is saying, "Hey, this is highest importance, that is lower
Yes.
importance, and the changes
Yep.
in the economy mean this is a good time to reemphasize this part of your job."
I really like and I can very much relate to some of your story in that I grew up around math and computer science. And again, I liked it, but I thought it was boring. It was like, eh. And it took me a while to kind of figure out where I would land. But one of the things that you brought up that I think is really interesting about your background that I look forward to us getting into some of this is, to your point, a lot of business leaders I talk to, they know their business, they understand what they're trying to do. But to your point, there's so much stuff going on. It's a matter of prioritizing. And what you said backstage that I really liked, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's about trade-offs. And really, that really is the nature of being a senior business leader, is just understanding there's not necessarily always a do this, do that. It's, okay, what am I giving up to accomplish this? And is the trade-off worth what I'm going to get in return? And just this constant state of making decisions based on information.
Exactly. And the CEO for any corporation, the scarcest resource in the company is the CEO's time and attention.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And so helping them make the most of that time and understand if you're going to focus on 10 things,
Yeah,
these are the 10 things to be focused on because these other ones aren't necessarily going to have the biggest impact.
sure.
Okay. So for you, as you look at things, I mean, depending on which media outlets you read, you'll hear all things. There's all sorts of clickbait headlines. Sometimes you hear the world's ending. Sometimes you hear we're in a utopia and it's just going to be exponential growth and wealth, until the dawn of. Where do you sit on kind of where things are right now as you look at things, and how are you feeling about kind of the current state?
And what's your time horizon when you ask that question? Are you thinking, a year or two, or are you thinking a decade or two?
I think given the fact that, well, so I actually would be interested your shorter term take on, like, let's say the past couple years and where we're going to go in the next couple years, kind of as you look at the shorter term outlook. But I always am really interested in how has the last 10 or 20 years either prepared us for this or not prepared us because there's
Okay.
been some dynamic shifts. So I'm actually interested that kind of combination of the two.
All right, good. Am forecasting slow growth, but growth, not a
Okay.
recession, in the rest of 2024 and on into 2025. The Federal Reserve tightening, the higher interest rates have lagged effects. So there's some uh, contractionary effort in the pipeline that we have
Okay.
not fully gotten. And that is what makes the Federal Reserve's challenge so great, is that they're looking at what have been the effects of our policy so far and what's in the pipeline that is going to come down whether we change our policy or not. And those
Okay.
time lags, Milton Friedman said, are long and variable. And I wrote in my first book that whenever the Fed tightens, at first nothing happens, and then there are articles in the New York Times saying monetary policy is not as effective as it used to be,
Right.
because it's just waiting for the time lags, and then boom,
Yeah.
you get hit. And I think that but we're in this situation where my first instinct is to say long time lags, but monetary policy will be effective. And then I'm reminded that the federal government spending side is huge and throwing a lot of stimulus into the economy. And the Federal Reserve tightening is not fully offsetting all of the stimulus from government
Okay.
expenditures exceeding government revenues. So we're in this sort of, what's the balance between what the
Yeah.
monetary policy is doing and what the fiscal policy is doing?
Okay. Well, and I feel like when I talk to other just people in general, whether they're senior leaders or people, and I feel like some of this tension that we're seeing where it's like we've made some steps to try and keep things moving, but it also isn't necessarily. I think there was some perceptions like, well, we'll throw nitrous in the tank and then it'll just fix it. But economics doesn't really work that way. It's not like you just flip a switch and then magically everything's all fixed. And the last couple of years have been pretty disruptive.
Yeah, and there are a lot of moving parts.
Okay.
That and some of the moving parts we don't quite understand. It's like we inherited a model from the aliens or from a previous generation. We don't know how it works. And here's a gilhickey, and what does it do? Can we take it out? If it breaks, does the whole thing come crashing down or not? We're flying, maybe not blind, but visibility impaired.
Okay. So on that, I am actually curious, and I think this will just help as I think through this, but also anybody watching or listening thinks through this. What are some of the things that, as you look at kind of the way economics is working and the variables and the buttons and the levers we've historically considered, what has been or what continues to be still consistent? And then what are some of these disruptive factors that you go, this is some of this alien techno, like alien stuff that we just haven't had to deal with before that is actually throwing up some uncertainty.
Yeah, well, consistency, that's a good question. When I was a young buck economist, I would
Okay.
see a cause, and then I'd want to see, oh, I can't get this right, a cause, and I want to see the effect.
Okay.
And I was so proud of myself for seeing that this cause would have such and such an effect. And I
Okay.
would want it to happen right away.
Okay.
and
So always
I
having like a
need
one-to-one correlation and always going, yep, this happened. And then immediate A plus B equals
right.
C.
And what
Okay.
I ignored was the time lags. That I
Okay.
had the connection right, but I was anxious. I was eager for it to happen, and then there was a time lag, and I waited 6 months, 12 months, and eventually it happened. But that led me to, and maybe it's a personality thing as much as anything, to say, okay, relax, calm down. You don't have to forecast that it's going to happen next month. It's more likely to happen 6 months. Just chill out.
Okay.
So I needed to chill out as a young forecaster, and I think I've done a fairly good job of that. But things always take time. The adjustments are actual physical adjustments of somebody used to work here and now works there, or this
Okay.
product used to be made to order, now it's made for inventory. That takes a while to change. So it just takes time for the economy to change. That's one thing I've learned that I
Can we
keep
can we
coming back
go
to.
into this one a little bit? I
Sure.
actually would love to just kind of pick your brain on this because if people who have listened to my stuff know I regularly talk about, especially in this current age where there just seems to be so much pressure to go do faster, do more, like constantly, oh, that didn't work, quick, make a decision, like throw AI at this and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
It actually almost creates more chaos because it makes it even harder to know, well, wait, did this change even work? Because we actually changed it before we even get a chance to see whether it had the impact we had. How have you found success in helping people slow down a bit in that? Because there is sometimes extreme pressure in the business sphere to go, well, we got to get it up this quarter or by next month or whatever. And it's like, well, to your point, some of these things, it's like, well, A plus B will eventually equal C, but it may not happen this month.
Yeah. Well, this is a challenge in, I think, all aspects of life, from from economic forecasting, business, sports, personal relationships. Is I go in and I've got a plan,
Yep.
and then the plan doesn't seem to be working. Do I need to give the plan more time, or do I need to
Yeah.
throw away the plan? And
Yeah.
I've made both mistakes. I've stuck
Okay.
with plans that weren't working a long time, and I've thrown away perfectly good plans because they were taking me a while.
Okay.
And I don't think there's an easy solution to that. I
Okay.
My presumption is trying to understand why the plan was expected to work. What were the
Okay.
critical values? Did we think customers would have this behavior? Did we think we could get our production costs to there? Did I think my spouse would respond well when I said
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
Let's not go into too many details there, but you know,
No.
in all aspects of life, it's like, hey, was there a good reason to think the plan was working? Have the factors that led to confidence in the plan changed, or is it that we
Okay.
just need to give it more time?
Okay. I think there's two really profound pieces of wisdom in there that I think is really helpful, regardless. Because to your point, this isn't just playing the economy or business. This is just life skills.
Yeah.
But really, one of them is, you highlighted this, is knowing what it is you were hoping to accomplish with what you did. And I'm always surprised by how often, and even in myself, sometimes you can charge into something without actually taking the time to go, what were we actually hoping to see on the other end
Yeah.
by doing this? So that we know what, like, did we make it? Did we not? Are we making progress on that? If you don't set that target, you're never going to know if you're doing it. But then also taking that time to kind of autopsy it and go, if it's not making the progress that I was hoping for, why? Like, what is going on? So, like you said, did factors change? Has the business shifted? So that, to your point, you don't just abandon it too early, but also you don't end up staying on a ship that, hey, we've torn a hole in the hull. We got to get off the boat type of a thing. Because I've seen that too. I've watched people stay on the ship convinced, no, if we just keep hammering this wall longer, eventually it'll work. And it's like, well, no, you're going to be at the bottom of the Pacific.
Right. Yeah. And that's a challenge. And I encourage businesses not just to have a plan that says, our sales will be X dollars at the end of the
Yes.
year, but why will it be X dollars? Is it the old customers spending more? Is it new customers coming in? You take that simple dichotomy and you can actually then see as you go through the year, are we getting the new customers we expected?
Yeah.
Is the ticket value of the old customers really going up as we thought it would? And try to get to the underpinnings of that forecast. I
Okay.
was talking to an athlete who had really great success, world champion level success, about setting goals. And he was saying, yeah,
Yep.
you need to set goals. And I said, well, in my amateur stuff, I set goals and it doesn't make much difference. And he says, well, what do you do in the goal setting process? And I said, well, I set a goal, finish in the top 5. He says, you think about what it's going to take to get to the top 5? I'm like,
Yeah.
no. And he says, oh, well,
Yeah.
that's the key of the goal setting. You say, in order to be at the top 5, I have to improve in this area and that area. And I'm sort of okay in the third area. And then you have to have metrics for all of those things where you need to improve. So it's metrics upon metrics to see if, and then once you have that more complex structure, you can see where you're going right, where you're going wrong. Are you
Right.
likely just to is just going to take longer, but it's happening, or do you need to throw out your whole theory?
Yeah. Okay. No, and I think it goes back to what we were saying from the beginning, that it's all about really weighing the trade-offs of some of these things and understanding the complexity of it. A funny, funny, not so funny example I think of on a personal note, that somebody I was coaching once, they were talking about wanting to make more money. And when we really understood, well, why? Ultimately, the goal was to spend more time with their family, but the goal of but before they were going to be able to get there, their kids were going to be grown. And I was like,
Right.
you're shooting at a goal, you're going to miss the target by the time you get there. Like it's and I think that can sometimes happen, whether it's professional, personal, all aspects of life, where we don't necessarily understand the trade-offs of our goals, and then you end up you reach your goal and you go, well, that didn't actually even get me what I thought I was shooting for.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So that's one piece, and I think that's really helpful. So that's one area that is kind of consistent, is this having to understand the why, the what, the timelines that often are associated with the trade-offs that you're making. Any other things that when you go consistently, these things are remaining the same?
Yeah. One of the things that I find is I hear people who are heavily influenced by the political news, and they
Right.
think, we're going to hell in a handbasket. And this includes my liberal friends and my conservative friends. They're
Yeah, it's
both
on both sides. It's
yeah,
on both
absolutely,
sides. You see it
absolutely,
on both sides of the spectrum,
right,
that if XYZ candidate doesn't get in, or if this
yeah,
politics doesn't go this way,
yeah,
the world's going to end.
right. And the consistent thing I see is that we got 150 million, something like that, people who get up in the morning and drag their rear end into work.
Okay.
And and they're just focused, they're not so much focused on the news as uh keeping their job, doing a good job, raising a family, pursuing their personal interests, could be sports, could be religious, could be art,
Yep.
whatever. uh and that people just go on, and it's almost as if the news is totally irrelevant for 99% of the people out there. They just go
Okay.
about doing their work, and that keeps the economy going. So no matter how bad you think today's headlines are, people are still going to work.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I think going back to some of the uncertainty and just unease people are feeling, I think that's a important thing to just consider. And again, just to hear that hasn't really changed. That
Yeah.
regardless of what you read in the headlines, the vast majority of things are just going to continue on as they have. And not to get not that you don't care. I think if I were kind of representing your position, it's not that you don't care or it doesn't matter. It's just this apocalyptic,
Yeah.
this is going to destroy things, is not helpful.
Yeah. And another way to express it is the economy is not fragile. You
Okay.
look at the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, we peaked at about 10% unemployment. But 10% unemployment, I can do the arithmetic right here. I've got my abacus. Um,
I
10%,
love it.
10% unemployment equals 90% employment.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and that was pretty bad. So, things are
Okay.
not as fragile as we sometimes think.
Okay, so from an economic lens, and again, I think that's reassuring for folks. And I know lots of people whose stories they have gone through a lot of change. It can absolutely feel like some of this stuff is up in the air. And I think we'll get into some of the what are the disruptive factors. But in general, overall, it's not as fragile because I do think there's a lot of people, even myself sometimes. There's some days where I'm like, good grief, am I going to wake up and like the world's just going to be on fire because something broke? And from your lens, you're going, it's not that, it's not that, it's not going to explode on a dime.
Right, right. And, regardless of how the November election comes out, we'll be on pretty much the same path either way.
Okay. Okay. Well, and it's funny you bring that up because I've got some people in my circles that are all over the spectrum. And definitely sometimes the folks who are, I tend to be pretty even keel most of the time, but some of the folks I know who are a little more high spirited, I guess I'll say, when you actually have a conversation and go, what actually has changed in your day to day? Like if you actually slow down and reflect on this,
Right.
I get all these things are uncertain. I get all this stuff. But if you were to actually document what's happened to you over the last 3 to 6 months, what has actually changed in your life as a result of this? Most of the time it comes back as not really much, when you really get down to it.
And that would be the same in a business conversation. What has
Yeah.
changed at your business? Yeah, you got this tax, you got, these regulatory burdens, but you've had regulatory burdens for years and years, and maybe it's, a little bit worse, not a big deal. It's,
Okay. Okay.
business is still about satisfying customers while keeping your costs low.
Okay. So despite all the narratives out there that everything's changing, the whole world is upside down, not everything is changing, and in general, your take on it is overall we'll be all right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So then let's get into some of the disruptive factors because I'm
Right.
curious, especially over the past couple years, and I talk a lot about what's happening in the tech space. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you go, ooh, this is unexpected. This is different, or this is something that we don't necessarily have a ton of experience dealing with that is a little bit of a X factor in some of the stuff we're looking at.
Well, artificial intelligence keeps coming up, and I
Okay.
think that um, there's a lot of money being spent right now. Build more chips, build large language models, and um, I think every business leader knows that it's going to have an impact, but it's like how big an impact, how soon, and in what dimension. So
Okay.
this is just the hottest topic as I go around talking to business audiences. Even if I'm not brought in specifically to talk about AI and the economy, the
Oh, it
first
comes up.
question comes up. Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. What's
Yeah.
AI going to do? Are there going to be any jobs left for anybody?
Okay. Okay. So on that one, because I talk about this a lot, and I see so much pressure for, again, just professionals, businesses, all this stuff. There is almost this pressure of AI is the thing, which I actually sometimes don't think is helpful because I'm like, AI is like electricity. It just is a thing that we're going to integrate into things over time. And so I don't always see it being helpful when people say, we've got to get the AI thing figured out. And you're like, what do you mean you have to do this? So I'm curious, where are you seeing some of that come into play, or what are some of the things that you thought were going to happen that maybe aren't?
Well, there's a big picture we ought to get into, but maybe we can take a moment before we get to the big picture of
Sure.
job loss and that kind of stuff and talk about particular companies. A company, every company, I think, is going to be impacted by AI. And
Yep.
the reason to feel pressure is you may very well have a competitor who is using AI to better connect with customers that could be your customers, but won't be if
Yeah.
you are slow to adapt. And you may have a competitor, perhaps the same one, who's using AI to lower their costs and they're going
Okay.
to cut their price a little bit, knowing that their profit margin will still be fine. And all of a sudden, you're having to deal with price competition, but your costs are still high and your
Okay.
customers' costs are low. So if you are slow to adapt new technology that's going to get you more customers and cut your costs, you're toast.
Okay. Okay. So on those two fronts, because I think that is where, it's been interesting watching the space for a long time, but really these past few years have been really crazy in that there was all this pressure to change these things. But I'm going to focus on the first one, then we'll focus on the second one. One is what you hit on, as an example, customer experience. The potential that somebody could come in and say, hey, we can do customer experience better using artificial intelligence, and that becomes a competitive differentiator. That may feel disruptive or radically different because of what technology can do to help you accomplish this. But underneath that is this core of, if you are doing everything to make sure your customer service and customer interaction is top notch and you're doing the best that you can in that region, it becomes less of a threat. It's the kinds of things where you go, well, we weren't paying attention to this at all. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody came out and came up with a really innovative, creative way to do it. And we just didn't care about it before. Now it's going to curb stomp us.
Yeah. And, people don't talk too much about good customer experience. They talk about bad customer experience.
Right.
And we have enough bad customer experience. I was booking a hotel room, got a trip to New York coming up, and talk about a bad customer experience on multiple, areas, websites. And I'm like, there's a lot of opportunity to improve the customer experience. And
Yeah.
AI is going to help businesses do that. And if you are the last one to do that, you won't survive.
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to that, it's a theme that we've been talking about the whole time, is deeply understanding that consistent root of customer experience matters. So are you paying attention to it? Are you doing what you need to do to be successful in that? Because if you're not, to your point, and sometimes there's legitimate reasons why you haven't been able to, because it's been like, well, it wasn't scalable, or we didn't have the resources, or things like that. But I think that's one of the things where when people go, where do we implement AI? I'm like, that's the wrong question to be asking. The right question to be asking is, hey, here are opportunities in customer experience. Could we be doing this better with AI to make it more scalable, more personalized, those types of a thing.
Yeah, I saw one of the major consulting firms had a long article about AI in different industries, and about half of the it was actually a compilation of articles. Half of them said, "Oh, senior management needs to, create the guide for how their corporation will implement AI." And I'm like, senior management doesn't know. Senior management
No.
doesn't know what happens when somebody is at a call center and gets a phone call. And senior management doesn't know what happens in the store when a customer comes in and says, "You have this in red." So, what there does need to be some guidelines from on top, but a lot of this has to be a bubble up from the bottom, where people
Okay.
doing a job say, this has been a frustration for me. The 12 years I've done this job, and I just heard about a tool that eases that frustration, which
Okay.
means that you have to have line people, in some cases line employees, and others a first level manager who understands what the pain points are and is snooping around for what are the tools that may fix it.
Okay.
And so I encourage a lot of experimentation going on and a lot of reading. This is things like going to trade association meetings where somebody is saying, "Hey, there's this new tool that will allow you to, do a better job in some particular area." My vision is that we have the large language models, that drive ChatGPT and so
Yep.
forth. But that by itself, ChatGPT or Claude or the Google one,
Gemini or whatever, any of the
Gemini,
big
right?
ones.
Yeah, they're a little bit useful to me. I use them as a sounding board, but for the average person working, trying to get a job done, ChatGPT is not very much use, but there are over 1,000 companies harnessing that technology to make specific improvements in specific work
Yeah.
processes.
And
And
I talked about it last week I do a weekly update every week. And I talked about, or maybe it's this week. I don't know whether it's scheduled for this week or next, but talking about the rise of kind of AI agents, where we're
yeah,
going beyond this kind of hyper generalized, okay, it's helpful maybe if you're trying to draft an email or put together an outline for something. And again, super powerful tool, but going deeper into the, okay, but how is it really streamline, this role or solve this
right.
problem in a customer service interaction? ChatGPT isn't necessarily super helpful. It's these highly trained, specialized agents that can then go
Yes.
in and start to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, probably over 1,000 startups working on that. And
Yep.
but from the senior level corporate standpoint, it's like, how do we get our line workers connected to the tools that will help them?
Yeah.
And that requires an investment up front, an investment where nobody knows the payoff, but the investment is mostly time and a little bit of money for those workers to just snoop around. Is there a better
Yeah.
way for me to do this? And if you ask an employee, hey, go to a trade association conference to see what tools are out there, or just spend a couple of hours surfing the web looking for tools that'll help you do better. That's like a capital expense. You're not getting
Yeah.
anything directly productive for a couple of hours while the person is doing this, but hopefully the person comes up with a tool.
Well, and I think it's that intentional investment in continuous improvement
Yeah.
and experimentation, and saying this is actually part of our business expense because we have to do it to stay ahead, to again mitigate the risk of somebody else coming up with a better way to do it and completely disrupting the whole market. One of the things in Ethan, I appreciated, Bill, your point on this of, the importance of not necessarily saying, hey, C-suite, what is our AI strategy? Like, how are we going to do AI? Because to your point, the real value I see from a lot of these AI agents, these applications of this stuff, it's not decisions that to your point, the board would have any idea, even the intricacy of, oh, I don't know. I don't know enough about how this job is actually done to make a decision on whether this is a good AI strategy or not. But there's also this healthy tension where I do see people almost concerned, not almost, they are concerned that in some ways that can be disruptive to, well, am I training my replacement? Or what happens when we get to this point? Because again, this decision making of, well, what if we figure this out and then the board goes, great, we don't need people. And there are companies who have made this move. I can tell you, I've worked with some, and it doesn't go well when you go to the extreme, to your earlier point of just making radical changes and thinking, oh yeah, we can just do away with how we've done things forever. Doesn't fly. But I'm curious, on the disruption side, what's your take on some of the disruption that you might see from AI around jobs?
Well, so, let me do sort of the micro disruption and then talk about the macro disruption.
Okay.
The micro disruption, I talked to a person who's developed you call it scribing assistant. So a
Okay.
medical professional, a doctor, is talking to a patient, doing an exam, and the doctor is typing in to the computer notes for the medical record. The medical record
Yep.
is vital.
Yep. All the transcription.
Right. So there's an app that will record the conversation, knows the doctor's voice, the patient's voice, integrates it with the records, and after the patient visit is over, the assistant, the AI assistant, does a draft of the medical record, and it cuts a few minutes off of every patient visit.
Okay.
And their doctor is seeing 3 patients an hour for a day, and a few minutes here, a few minutes there on every visit adds up to an extra patient or two.
Okay.
And this is an activity that the doctor doesn't like doing.
Yeah.
You know, putting in notes, or a salesperson who has visited a client or talked to somebody on the phone. The sales guy doesn't like typing in notes on the call. So
No.
anything, and if it's on a factory floor, the easiest jobs to automate are the boring, tedious jobs.
Yeah.
And so people don't want to lose their job, but they don't mind losing boring and tedium. So I think that a good corporate strategy is, let's use the AI to reduce the need for new hires and let the gains come through normal attrition, shift people to where the growth is, to the extent that we
Okay.
have that flexibility. You don't have to say there's going to be a wholesale reduction in employment, because the economy is growing, and
Yeah.
the labor force is not growing very much.
No, it's not.
So, right.
Yeah, that's another big economic factor that I think so two follow-up questions. And well, before I have two follow-up questions, but one of the things that you highlighted there that I think is really valuable, going back to kind of our trade-off discussion. So the example you used of a physician who can be transcribing and use AI to do that rather than, again, the manual process. First of all, they didn't like it. But I think one of the things that, to the trade-off decisions that businesses can be making and thinking, what's the most important thing to our business for success, is making those critical decisions. Because while maybe those extra minutes could be used to scheduling more patients, they also potentially could be used to say, our patient experience scores are really low, and we consistently hear people don't have enough time to interact with their physician.
Right.
So let's, instead of just jamming more patients into the schedule, let's use those few minutes to say, hey, physicians, now you can actually spend more time talking to your patient, finding out use those, it's not necessarily always, but again, it's a trade-off of understanding, well, what's really more important to us as a business? Is it about getting more patients in because we're nailing the patient experience? Or our patient experience sucks because people feel like it's an assembly line? Well, hey, let's free this up so they have more time to actually spend with the patient.
That's right. And the benefits of AI can be used in either direction.
Yes.
Quality or quantity, and the best answer varies depending on the company and the function within the company and what their needs are.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to the need to really take some time and understand, what are you trying to do and how
Yeah.
do you do this? Because I have seen companies where they just march down this and go, great, if we implement AI, we can streamline all this time. We can just jam more into the system. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
maybe that's not the right strategic approach if you want to stay competitive in the landscape.
Right. Right. Yeah. But I used healthcare as an example because
Yeah.
it's short-staffed, and
Correct.
even if we don't improve the customer experience when the patient is in with the doctor or nurse, if we can just make getting an appointment easier,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's a big challenge. If you tell me I'm not going to get more time with the doctor, but I'll be able to schedule the appointment when I need the appointment, I'm giving you a thumbs up.
I'm a happier patient.
But in other circumstances, yeah, it's more time. So understand
Well,
what a good
exactly.
experience is.
And I think that goes back to this point of needing to understand from the frontline people, the people who are actually doing the work, where really are things breaking down, and balancing that. Okay, at the high level, here's where we're
Yeah,
seeing business opportunities, but how does that actually translate in the day to day? Like, what's actually going on, and where can AI help free us up to do some of that?
yeah, good.
Okay. So my follow-up questions, just from an economic standpoint, where you're sitting as an economist, you do hear these things of, oh, in the next 10 years, actually, Larry Summers, who's one of the OpenAI board members, is on record saying, we're not even going to need human labor in the future. And I hate these kind of statements because I'm like, you don't even know what the future holds. So to make a statement like that is just ignorant. But from an economic standpoint, are you seeing some of these doomsday things of like, oh, just massive job losses? Like, people are left and right, companies are rapidly adopting AI and it's massively disrupting? Or what has it been like from your vantage point?
Yeah, I was interviewing a robotics guy, trying
Okay.
to understand the future there, and I said, "Well, when are we going to have a robot that you would trust to pick up a baby?" And he said, I would never have a robot pick up a baby. And this is a guy who was right at the cutting edge of robotics. Uh, partially, and that I was thinking of when would I trust the robot not to, break ribs or, drop the kid. But he was just thinking, what does the kid need? The kid doesn't need a robot,
Yeah.
picking it up. A kid needs a human picking it up. In terms of Larry's comment that at some point we won't need human labor, I can conceive of that point. I don't expect to live long enough. I don't, even a young guy like you, I don't think we'll live long enough that we'll get there. So one of the things I've done in the last year and a half since ChatGPT came out was spent more time studying the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
So, we're talking 1700s, and we had a tremendous innovation. You remember the old fairy tales where there's a spinning wheel to take,
Yeah.
wool or cotton into thread? That was a
Yep.
hand operation, and then the spinning jenny connected it to a water wheel, at a dam.
Yep.
And then a few generations later, we did the same thing for weaving, and the number of weavers we needed, the number of spinners that we needed went way, way down. But what happened? First of all, people came to own two pairs of trousers instead of one because trousers
Yep.
went down in price by like 80% over
Okay.
a century. So people own two or three. I don't know how many pairs of trousers I have in my closet, but it's more than that.
But it's more than two or three.
Yes. So there's first of all, as things get cheaper, we'll do more of it. And
Okay.
we were talking about lousy customer experience on websites. That can be fixed. You just need some programming time. Programmers are going to be more powerful per hour worked because of Chat GPT and other assistants. So we'll have better experience there. But also, there are some things that will be very slow to benefit from AI.
Okay.
There's a pothole that just got fixed down the road from me. AI didn't fix the pothole. There was actually a human shoveling some hot asphalt into the pothole. Maybe at some point the robot gets there, but we're a long way from there. So, what are we going to want more of as trousers get cheaper,
Yep.
as the thing that AI does? Um, People have an interest in their shelter, and the whole bit about building a house, adding on to a house, upgrading a house. Uh, Very little AI help, and I've talked to contractors about this, and AI is going to help with uh, estimating what will it cost to do the wiring on this room addition, and what's the bill of materials. So that's a small improvement for like the project supervisor, but
Okay.
most of the wiring, most of the drywall is going to continue to be done by hand. And I think the construction trades are the a good opportunity. We're going to want to upgrade our lives,
Well,
and
speaking of industry that there are not enough people to
yeah,
meet the demands of people. I
yeah,
mean, I can just say I can't find a contractor to fix my house to save my life type of a thing.
yeah,
And so again, if there are ways that we can streamline and enhance some of this stuff, an example of this is, have you been following the 3D printed houses? It's
a little bit, yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
It's absolutely fascinating what can be done by this. But again, it's one of those things where, first of all, one, not everybody's going to have a 3D printed house because they don't make sense for everybody and it just doesn't work on a certain scale. So where it is really showing high probability in improving things is people who can't afford housing. It's bringing the cost of housing way down so that at least somebody who couldn't previously buy a house
sure,
can now buy a house, which is like, well, that's a net positive in terms of some of those things. And to your point, streamlining how quickly we can bid and the cost of materials and some things like that. And again, even the 3D printed houses, there's still people running the machine that's printing the house. You need contractors that go in and handle all this stuff. So my observation on this has been, it really truly is changing the work and filling holes where we just have not been able to close them in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a house, getting the walls built is one of the cheapest things. You know,
Right.
getting the plumbing, the wiring, all of that is the other thing. One of the other areas is human experiences.
Yeah.
So if a family has a little bit more money, what are they going to do? Maybe it's a gym membership. Maybe it's a vacation. Maybe it's hire a guide to go fly fishing. There are a lot of things that humans do to help other humans have a good experience. And that's
Yeah.
going to be, and the big picture that I've used is imagine a simple society and they need food, they need shelter, and they get really better at food production, and that's actually
Yep.
consistent with our experience. But suppose they double the productivity in food production, but they do not increase their productivity in shelter. And actually, the construction
Yeah.
industry in the United States has had net zero productivity gains. So
Yeah.
what happens? We can produce twice as much food with the same labor, but we don't want twice as much food.
We don't need twice.
Maybe a little. We don't need it. Maybe we want to upgrade a little bit less rice and beans, a little bit more of something,
Yep.
nicer. But what we would want in this simple two-sector economy is more shelter. So we have to
Yeah.
move resources from the area where we're productive to the area where we're less productive. And now we get to the challenge and the downside of the AI change, which is not everybody is flexible enough to shift from one sector to another.
That's true.
So we had 80% of the economy working in agriculture at one point. Now it's less than 2%, but we don't have 80% minus. I need to get my abacus there. 80% that we used to have minus the 2% we have. That's like a 78%. Do we have
78%.
78% unemployment? No, because
No, we don't.
so there'll be a reshuffling. The challenge is some individuals will not be able to reshuffle. A
Okay.
young person probably can. Okay, I worked 5 years in an area, and now my job has been eliminated by AI, maybe as a customer service rep. I've got to find something else to do. A young person can do that. But there are people who are, 50, 55 years old who've made a career out of writing up press releases based on
Yeah.
financial results. And now the AI can look at the financial results and write the press release. And maybe instead of 10 people doing that, you have one person double
Who's
checking.
just reviewing, double checking
Yeah,
what AI wrote and making sure it's all good before it goes out the door.
exactly. And, if you're 50, 55 years old and you've been doing this job, are you going to say, okay, the demand for yoga coaches has gone up and switch gears? Yeah.
Maybe.
There is one person who's writing press releases now who would love to be a yoga coach, but the other eight of them are like, no, 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 don't make me do that. So we'll see some people who have a difficult time adapting to the
Okay.
changes, and it will be worse the faster the changes occur. And we don't quite
Okay.
know how fast how fast it's going to be, but that's where I worry about people who are
Okay.
just not very flexible. And, you lose flexibility with age, and I'm talking mentally as well as
Yeah.
physically. And people who have invested a lot in a particular skill set are going to be hesitant to abandon it.
Okay. So I had somebody on last week, Sid Mohassan, and we were talking about this need for people to have an entrepreneurial mindset. Kind of everybody does, where it's kind of this, hey, you need to be reinventing yourself, and change is actually your friend. But again, change is often seen as this enemy to be mitigated, to be, kind of pushed down, instead of going, okay, whatever you're comfortable with now, you may not be able to be comfortable with next week. And to your point, the speed, I think, is what has a lot of people that I talk to right now really unsettled, because we just don't know. Is it, I'm going to have to readapt my skill set 6 months from now, or 2 years from now, or 10 years from now? And all the predictions I keep seeing, it just keeps moving in. But then to your point on some of the things where, everybody's might think it's all going to change by next year. One of the topics that comes up for me a lot is human robotics. That's why I laugh so hard when you talk to this person in robotics who's like, I wouldn't have a robot touch a baby type of a thing. Because you do see some of these things where you go, wow, look at these robots cracking eggs and loading the dishwasher and all of these things. But as I've dug into some of this, and I'm trying to find somebody who's deep in the robotics field to jump on the show and talk about this. But when you see a lot of these things, AI handles things really well in a very controlled, consistent, always the same environment. It doesn't always do so well when the ingredients of the dinner get shuffled on the thing, or the dishwasher doesn't open the way that it expected to. It just kind of completely malfunctions on some of these things. And to your point on the pothole, there's certain things where it's a lot harder for, I think we grossly underestimate how powerful and creative and flexible humans are with things. That technology, yeah, in many ways, it's come a long ways, but it also has a long ways to go to be able to do some of the things that people can.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. When you're talking about people need to be entrepreneurial, I had a corporate job, and the top guys reshuffled responsibilities so that virtually all of the managers had different responsibilities. And
Okay.
half of the management team loved it, and half of the management team hated it.
Okay.
Some people just don't like the change. And hey, I understood the old way. I don't know what the new way is. And I'm asking for direction from my boss, but my boss is too busy to talk to me because my boss is trying to figure out what's going on. And the
Okay.
other half of the people who embraced it, just said, "Oh, I can't get hold of my boss. I'll use my judgment.
I'll just
I'll
do
do this.
something else.
I'll do what I think is best without permission. I'll just
Okay.
do it." And those were the happy people and the successful people. But the fact is, we've got some large portion of our workforce and our population that just would prefer that the change go away and not bother them.
Yeah.
And we have to be aware of this. You have to be aware that here are human beings who don't want to be entrepreneurial. They just want to keep doing things the same way. I was visiting a factory, and I was watching a manual process, and it looked
Okay.
dull and boring. And I'm talking to the CEO, and he says, "Yeah, we're gonna automate that." But the guy who's been doing it has been here over 20 years. He's 3 years from retirement. So we'll wait until he goes. And I thought that was,
I
very
think it's
good.
cool.
And they
I think
could
it's
probably
cool.
save a couple of $1,000s if they automated it sooner and let him go. But on the other hand, like I said earlier, the scarcest resource is the CEO's time. And if the CEO says, I'll just put this on my to-do list 3 years from now when the guy goes,
Yeah.
that's actually pretty good too. Let's work on the position where the guy is retiring in the next 6 months, and
Right.
it's a
Let's just
hard to
start
fill
planning for that.
position. Let's figure that out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to, I think one of the things that was really encouraging, and, last week's conversation, that you hit on a really good point, that regardless of how fast technology and innovation moves, you still have the human factor of adoption. And I actually see a lot of that happening with technology right now, where it's like, yeah, it's capable of all these things, but the organizational readiness and the workforce readiness, the leadership, they're just like, we're just not even there yet. We can't even start to do this. And I think that can be a bit of a calming sedative for people who may feel like, oh, this whole thing's going to flip overnight. It's like, well, it's really going to take some time for some of this stuff to get integrated, because at least from what you've described, from the lens you're sitting, it's very much similar to mine, where even though there's a lot happening in the AI space, many organizations are still struggling to figure out, yeah, but where do we use it? What do we do with it? Even if they're at the stage of trying to implement it, you're dealing with this human resistance factor of people that are pushing back. And so you've got the CEOs that are going, we could do this, but the $3,000 we're going to save on it right now, it's not really worth it until this kind of a thing changes. So we're just not going to make that move. So there does seem to be a little bit of a lagging factor with a lot of this hype around the urgency behind everything.
Yeah. And let me throw in another thought. I talked about the need to get lower level people, the line employee and the first level manager thinking about the tools, but there is a role for the senior executives here. And I'd like to get that out on the table. There should be some corporate wide guidance on things like data protection. Do we want to make sure that the data are secure? Our customer data isn't getting leaked out. And that's a set of guidelines that the top leadership needs to provide. And another important guideline is where is there human oversight of this? So let's say that you've got an AI system taking incoming phone calls and routing them to the right department. Well, if it makes a mistake and routes a phone call to the wrong department, that's not a big deal. But if an AI system is saying, this guy needs a $3 million refund, let's transfer the money out right now.
Yeah.
let's have a human double check that $3 million refund, unless it's coming to Bill Connerly, in which case,
in that case, just let it be a clerical oversight.
Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think that's a good point for the senior leaders listening to this, because I think, and something else that we talked about earlier that I think is really critical is for senior leaders to be really clear on what are we trying to achieve and where are those key priorities for us as an organization, so that the folks who are in the front lines doing this work know, hey, there's an opportunity to do this, but does that get us closer to where we're trying to go as an organization, or does it take us further away? Because that's where you can run the risk of people going, hey, I found this really great tool and it does this thing. But if you're not clear as an organization on, but strategically, let's go back to the healthcare example. And for us, it's not necessarily volume, but patient experience, because we believe firmly that patient experience is critical. It's our value proposition. It's our key differentiator. It's an area of greatest opportunity. Making sure that you have that locked and loaded as a senior leader so that people can start looking at where are there opportunities that I believe can improve customer experience, because I know that's the strategic direction of the organization. I think it's another really powerful way. So people know where can we look for that innovation that matters versus, I see a lot of noise with AI where it's like, yeah, you can implement it and you can waste a lot of money on stupid stuff that is not adding any value to your organization.
Stupid stuff, but cool.
Cool, right? Yeah, like you're like, wow, isn't this so cool how we can do this? And you're like, right, but what's that getting us at the end of the day? Well, nothing.
So
or it's actually working against us.
Yeah. So companies need to come back to, what is our mission? What are our underlying principles? How do we want to run this company, not in 2024, but from 2024 to 2034, 2044? What's our mission? What are our underlying principles that are going to guide us as we do this work?
Yeah. Which, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, when we were talking about consistency, that to me is something that, whether you're talking about a company in 2024, a company in 1950, a company in 1850, those kinds of things are a wise investment of your time and energy, because those are the things that help you navigate, okay, yeah, we're going through an AI phase now, or we're going through an industrial revolution here and there. But if you're clear on some of those cores, you're just going to adapt to the circumstances.
That's a good way to put it. If you're clear on the cores, you're going to adapt to the circumstances.
Okay. Well, this has been super helpful. And I'm glad to hear that as an economist, you don't share some of the headline narratives that everybody's going to be out of work in the next 5 years and that the economy is going to explode if XYZ candidate gets elected into office. And I think that's some really much needed calm to the storm that I see happening all over the place. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on that.
Great chatting with you, Christopher.
Well, Bill, I have really enjoyed this. Hopefully everybody watching, listening along the way, if you've been feeling some of that anxiety or tension that so many people are right now, you're not alone. And I think this conversation has illustrated there are absolutely things that you can be doing, ways that you can be approaching it to help mitigate that. But also there's a lot of consistency and things that it's not as crazy as it may feel if you read MSNBC or Fox News or whatever media outlet that's going to tell you the end of the world is right on our doorstep. So thank you, Bill, for joining us. Thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we will see you next week.